Yes? Okay. This is the second edition of the Masters Talk by Elisava. And it's a great pleasure because after pandemic, no, the first edition was before, no, and our lives is just before and after the lockdown, no. So it's very, very exciting for all of us to be here. And also, I'm in charge of presenting Viviane Stappmanns, that we know each other for some other occasions and it's really a great pleasure to introduce her. She's a curator at Vitra Museum. Of course, I guess you all know which is Vitra, the Museum of Design, and all the amazing work that they are doing there. And also, Viviane, she also has been working as a teacher at many schools and university. One is the School of Architecture and Urban Design at RMIT in Melbourne, Australia, and some other like the Art and Design School in Karlsruhe. So this is about could go on and on, but I would like just to introduce her, not just a colleague, no, that with, of course, worth knowing because of her professional career, but also of someone, no, a person that is coming to Barcelona and she's already starting these relationships with the city, with us, no, students, practitioners, and researchers in design, this community of all of us in Barcelona. No? She's today with us for this lecture, for this talk, about her work, but also she's now here, which is also my home. No? This is the Architectures Association building, and this is the open, what we call it, Centro Obert d'Arquitectura, which means it's the open center for architecture, open for all, let's say, the citizens. I mean, open to everyone, like tonight for Elisava. And moreover, also, she's starting relationship with the Museum of Design of Barcelona. And because this will be next year an exhibition on women in design that all of us, we shouldn't miss, of course, on these women designing from the 19th century till today. And this is going to happen, I think, next October, if I'm not wrong. And so all of this, I like this idea, no, that Viviane is with us, and we will see her around, no, and also joining this community that we are. And what I hope, John, I'm ending, is just to say that we really would like to see how she unwraps or unboxes her practice to all of us to understand how I'm a student of design, no, how she became a curator in a great design museum, and how she's been focusing more and more on the eco-social crisis that we are currently living, and how the exhibition space and the work of curators, it's really crucial, no, to think and reflect on what can be done in those spaces and how to address these issues and communicate this to the general audience. So I don't say anymore. Please, Viviane, come. Let's applause, welcoming applause for Viviane. And the stage is yours.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. It's so exciting to be here. I've been invited, I think I was invited a year and a half ago and then postponed again. So everything okay with this mic? And now I'm finally here, which is just so great. And I would really like to thank everyone from Elisava for the invitation. I've met so many nice people already, and I'm sure I will meet many more. I also, like all of you, haven't really travelled much for the past 2.5 years, so it's even more exciting. So as Olga already said, I'm Viviane Stappmanns. I'm a curator at the Vitra Design Museum in Weil am Rhein, which is in Germany. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And before I get started, just a couple of notes on the title. It's called Curating for the Common Good. It's kind of part of an investigation that's been going on for me for about 4 years. It kind of runs alongside my practice as a curator, and also I try and sort of incorporate it into teaching, because I'm really interested in how, as curators and also as designers, we can make a contribution to, as Olga said, sort of the discussion around social justice and ecology, and what that kind of mean, and how the cultural space can open that up. But I will get to talk about that in my talk, but also as I was thinking about what I would be talking about when I came here, I thought, well, it's probably, I mean, this is called the Masters Talks, and I'm not really sure if it's the Masters Talks because everyone here is a master's student, or is it like in tennis where you invite the older players, but a little bit of both. But it's it made me think that exactly 20 years ago, so I am, I suppose, a little bit older, because exactly 20 years ago I was sitting there like you here, and I remember very distinctly a first few moments where I got in touch with curation and what it is to curate design exhibitions. And so I kind of feel like as curators we are in the business of sort of looking into the past to also understand the present and perhaps the future. That's a lot of what we do. And I feel like I would like to take you along a little bit on my own personal journey, how I got to be a curator, because I also remember when I was a student, all I wanted to do was see people's studios and how exactly do they work. So I'll invite you in on those practical parts. But I think it's also a moment to talk about how curating design and architecture is changing, and how perhaps in turn design is also changing a little bit. So going to those 20 years ago, one of the first design exhibitions that I remember and recall like seeing was in Australia, where I lived from when I was 19 until I was 34. So pretty much my adult life. And I did 2 degrees there at a university called RMIT. Some people from RMIT are here tonight as well, which is lovely. Everything is kind of converging. And I remember there was, I did a journalism degree first, and I was very, I still to this day, I'm very committed to journalism and to the way journalists work. And then I was very lucky to do a master's in design, but I was the only person there who didn't have an undergraduate degree in design or architecture. I kind of was new, and I was always a little bit the outsider. And it was great that I was admitted with that background, but I did stay a little bit the outsider. And I remember thinking when I saw this exhibition, which was, it was put on by the British Council, they really wanted to promote British design in the world. I think initially they showed this exhibition called Great Expectations. It's from the Charles Dickens novel, where there's in the final scene a long banquet, so that's what you see here in the exhibition design. But they really wanted to promote British design, and sort of had this kind of national approach to it, and it was very much about the economy too, design and innovation and sort of driving business. So that was the first time I saw a specific design exhibition. I thought to myself, that could be a field that I can work in. I've got this journalism degree, and it's all about writing and thinking about things and observing, and also now, I'm doing this design degree. And then a second moment was that I saw an exhibition about Werner Panton. You probably all know him. He is a designer who died in the late 90s, and he was kind of very famous for this sort of psychedelic 70s design. I saw that exhibition when I was an exchange student in Lisbon in Portugal. I remember seeing it on September 11th. I was lying in this cave, and then I went out and found out what happened. And so those two were sort of moments where I thought, oh, okay, so there's people curating design exhibitions. So Now we will take a step forward to 20 years later. I will get back to that. Just remember those two exhibitions, and there will be a reason why I talked about them specifically. So fast forward 20 years, and I work for that institution where I saw the exhibition 20 years ago. I don't want to paint it as some great success story, it's just something that happened. And so this is, for those of you who don't know it very well, this is a Vitra campus in Weil am Rhein in Germany. Some of you have probably been. And for those of you who haven't, come and look me up. I'll show you around. And so this is very much on the French and German border. So in the background you see Basel, which is Switzerland. Next to the train tracks is France, and this is sort of the last southwest corner of Germany, where Vitra, which is a furniture manufacturing company, but they refer to themselves as a cultural commercial company. They sort of have a manufacturing facility, but also a cultural spot where the museum is. And it's a family business. It's always been a manufacturing site. And in the 1980s, it burned down in a very devastating fire after a lightning strike hit, and the fire brigade from Basel was stuck in traffic, I think, and so a lot of it burned down. And when they rebuilt it, it was rebuilt as a sort of architectural ensemble, and a lot of international architects were invited to build buildings. So what we see there now is this big building here is one of the newer ones. It's Herzog Dumeron, who are also from Basel. That's the building, or like also lots of smaller structures like this Buckminster Fuller Dome, which is part of our collection at the museum, or the fire station by Zaha Hadid, which probably everybody knows. It's now you see the relation, right? There was the fire, and so they started their own fire brigade there, so something like that wouldn't happen so much anymore. So it's there now, and we use it also for exhibitions sometimes. And then also sort of industrial facilities. This is a building by Sana, the architects from Japan. And of course, the museum where I work, which was Frank Gehry's first building in Europe. And that's where we put on exhibitions for the very first, like we conceptualize them, and then we show them there, and then they go on tours around the world for about 5 years. And that's a smaller space where we kind of do smaller, quicker exhibitions. I'll talk about that in a minute as well, because it's really fun to do exhibitions in that space. And since 2016, we've also had a permanent facility for our collection. And this is where we make the jump to curating, because I suppose every museum, I will go into some very basic things here now. I hope that's okay for you. But some of you are very familiar with this and others aren't. But for most museums, the basis of what they work on is a collection of artifacts or artworks. In our case, that's furniture, but it's not Vitra furniture. It's a very big collection of about 20,000 pieces. But the focus is furniture, and sort of following, I suppose, since industrialization, that period. So as curators, we work with that collection, but we also lend pieces to other exhibitions. So that's part of the collection, but this is most of it is like underneath this building where it sort of sits in climatized conditions. It's all inventorized. We watch very carefully over it. So now this is the backdrop before I work. That was very practical introduction to how this museum looks like, and now comes the next practical introduction about how we make an exhibition on a very practical level. So next one. Also, before I came here, I do get asked when I say I'm a curator, like if I go to the physiotherapist and they say, what do you do for a job? I usually make something up, because otherwise it takes a very long time to explain what I actually do. And the other day I typed something into Google. I was looking for a particular curator, and these questions came up. And then I thought, yeah, okay, that's what everyone wants to know, isn't it? Like, what's it like? What makes a good curator? I wonder what a good curator is too. What does it mean? I wonder that as well. and what do you actually do, and what do you need to be a curator, and is it being stressful? We get to the stressful part in the Q&A. And out of these questions, there's a lot of questions about, what are the tools and techniques and how do we work? So I will try and explain it in a very practical level first. So next slide. So literally, it usually means to care, right? In Spanish, it's very obvious. It means to heal, and curators of collections are usually, like in the olden days, the people who really take care of that collection and extend it, right? Next slide. But of course, we don't just take care of things. We also sort of create the stories around the exhibitions that we make. That is a picture of a curator that some of you might know. In the 1970s, there was really this move, especially in the art world, for curators to become artists themselves. And he is a person who really kind of drove that forward. Harald Seemann, he's a Swiss man, and that's what his work, I saw that in an exhibition once. Apparently that's what his work desk looked like when he made an exhibition, and that's, I think, what many of our desktops look like these days. But it's all about, sort of trying to get through a lot of material to find that story that you want to tell. Next slide. And then, next slide. And then sort of something like that happens. That's, of course, not my picture, but I have it hanging on my desk. It's David Shrigley. He's an illustrator. And sometimes you get really quite confused, and somehow in all of that, sometimes you think you get it, then you don't get it, and then somehow in all of that you get super confused, but then you kind of find what you want to talk about, and you do that either working with your own collection or with other things. And to those other things I will get. So next slide. And if you work with your collection, like we do a lot, it's all about finding those objects that you want to show. Next slide. And sometimes finding out a lot of objects. So an exhibition that I'm going to talk about a little bit is the exhibition that is actually coming to Barcelona. It's called Here We Are, Women in Design. And it's opening in 10 months at the Barcelona Design Museum. And the curators are also here, who will be working together to sort of add a Spanish part onto it. And so with her, for instance, we kind of knew we had this chair in our collection, but we weren't so sure if she really did it or her husband and what happened. And so you go out to a lot of archives and try and find all these things that happened around it. Was it really her design? It turned out yes, it was, and she made a very significant contribution to this idea of a cantilevered chair. But you sort of have to do that work sometimes. So next slide. And then when you work with all these objects, we start kind of working with the exhibition designers. That's the part that I like personally the most, because I'm not very good at coming up with ideas on my own, or at least I don't like it. And so we start working with a great exhibition design team and really sort of do workshops in this space. This is in the middle of the pandemic. We did it in the sort of workshop where all the machines are, so that we had a lot of fresh air, but we start sort of working through these ideas. Next slide. And then come up with a way to sort of tell the story not just on an intellectual level, but also through the space. Like, do we want here, it's like a sort of the first room that we worked with was a little bit more mysterious and you had to peek in. The next one was very clean and white. The third one was very complex, and so we sort of developed these boards as a communication tool between us curators, who probably know the whole story on an intellectual level, and the exhibition designers, who will help us transform it into a spatial experience. So this is now in German, but that was also part of this board, just so we can kind of create these things. And then we start moving everything into the space. This is in a Rhino model. But you can do it in lots of other things as well. But like this kind of exhibition making that we do, there is lots of exhibition making ways, but the way we do it, it's very precise, because the tour is so long and everything has to travel for a long time. So we kind of know where every stamp is about 6 months before every little tiny piece has its place about 6 months before the exhibition opens, because we need to make, so many people are involved with it, it needs to fit into crates, to travel for a long time. And so this is what it looks like. We can just flip through the next couple of ones. This is really just to illustrate the process and not the story. There will be lots of testing of materials, so none of that has to happen anymore before when we open. Next. And then there is, I know there's a lot of graphic designers here. There's always huge arguments about how much text can be in the exhibition. We want there to be a lot because we have so much to say. And the graphic designers want almost nothing. And then we settle in the middle, but also, as Olga said in her introduction, I've been teaching at university, curating and scenography for quite some time at different universities. And when I do this, I always tell the student curators that I work with, like, use text as the last thing, like try to tell the story through whatever you can, all the things you have, through objects, films, experiences, the way you kind of work with the space, and then whatever you cannot say, you put on the label, but you don't start with the label. So I, in fact, also don't like text, but I have to defend that position sometimes. And we sort of invent these hierarchies of, you know, this text here and the next one there, and what size do they have and what do we need, and so that all gets its place as well. One exhibition that I'm working on now is opening in 4 months, and everything already has its place. And so we try lots of different materials. They need to last for a long time, so it's almost a little bit like building a house. Sometimes when you make small exhibitions that only are for 3 months, you can just try doing it while you build up the exhibition, but for these long exhibitions we have to be very well organized with materials. And then there's the corporate design that I won't go so much into it. It needs, you all know, I think, a lot about these sorts of things. It needs to translate to different things. As a curator, I'm not that involved in that because I feel like there's better people to do that. And that's what this show that's coming to Barcelona looked like in Weil am Rhein. In Barcelona it might look completely different. Next one. What I always find amazing, this is the last part of this, is you make these renders, and because we are so precise, it's exactly what it ends up looking like as well. So this is the render, and that's what it then looks like in this space. So we kind of know it pretty exactly what it looks like. And this is just a quick thing on this idea of try and use all kinds of things that you have, like don't just put the object there and the text, but work with different materials and images. So this is like about a women's community that we found that was in the 20s, sort of next to the Bauhaus, but no one knows them because they isolate themselves a little bit. It's the next one. And so we sort of also used all their photography in the exhibition to communicate what they are about. So next one, and also next one. And also, of course, sort of larger media installations. And next one. And these are just some more impressions from that show. And next one. And then, of course, the last step is, this is what something might look like. This is not from this show, it's from another. But we have the one in Weil am Rhein. This is our museum. We always work with that space, but of course it also needs to translate into other spaces. So this might be a completely different museum in a different space. And so that's why we are so precise about designing all these things, because we really need to, sometimes we already know where it's going, and so we make it so that the people we work with have the least amount of problems when they unpack all these containers and put it into their space. And of course it's already designed for them anyway, laid out. So now we get, now I talked about what I first saw, and I talked about how we make exhibitions in a very practical way. And the next thing, going back to, first being a journalist and then becoming a curator, and those are the things that I have learned about curating. Some other curators are completely different, but that's what's informed my practice and my teaching and the way I think about it. So I was a journalist, and I did work for my first job was for the newspaper in Australia, for the car pages of the Australian big newspaper there. And I was an editorial assistant there and the only girl. And then I sort of started moving a lot into, sorry, I wasn't raising my hand. No, so anyhow, so all this journalism experience of sort of observing, you know, so my first point is it's about, curating is about observing. Like I saw Harald Seemann before, like I showed him, you know, he was like all about sifting through these papers. And I think that's the first stop in curating, is to be very observant, and I really got a lot of that from my journalism experience and degree. And this is a book we made at the Vitra Design Museum. It took 10 years to make. I wasn't involved in it very much, but or not just on the sides, but you know, it's also about being very observant, finding all those stories. So next. And I also had a side hustle, a side project that I did for a long time with some friends in Australia, but then also in Berlin, and it was about mapping cities and really understanding how their creative processes work, how the architecture has influenced perhaps a community of jewelers and how they all come together. I'm sure there's something like that in Barcelona as well. And keep moving, and we sort of did that across a number of cities over 6 or 7 years. It started in Melbourne, so you can go back. And so that was really about kind of connecting the dots, understanding a lot of how do all these systems go together, how were they in the past, and what has happened now, what kind of community do they create now. So in Melbourne, this is now a really long time ago, we also sort of asked a lot of people to participate and make maps to sort of have a diagram of what they saw the city like. And that kind of connects into curating as well, like, and really talking to an audience. And this is a very small exhibition I made a while ago with 2 Mexican photographers who were very obsessed with photographing the buildings of those emigre, like big emigre architects like Marcel Breuer and Walter Gropius, who went to the US. And these 2 photographers, they photographed their buildings like paparazzi. And so we sort of also, for the visitors, needed to make them understand what these 2 how all these people fitted together. So next slide. So we often have made sort of maps and diagrams in exhibitions, so you can enjoy the exhibition, but you can also sort of somehow understand how all these dots connect. And also again in this women's exhibition that's coming here, we sort of really try to trace all these designers that we showed and sort of link it back to developments in the women's movement, and sort of made quite a few diagrams there. And so I sort of feel like I am, from all that experience in the past, a little bit obsessed with sort of mapping everything and sometimes bringing that into exhibitions. And then also I feel like curating is a lot about finding new formats. I stand here today as a curator from a design museum, and we have this museum and we just work there. But I think for you could all be curators and sort of invent all these new formats. And when I was younger and was working freelance, next slide, and we do that as a museum as well, but it's often like making symposiums or talk series. But I think you could be much more free. Next slide. We did a thing called the Audio Design Museum, also back in Australia. It was back in the day of like podcasts, early podcasts. So we made all these, it was a group of us who sort of lobbied for it, got some money from the Australian Council of the Arts, and made all these podcast tours and curated them throughout the city. So somehow I still feel that's quite current, and I really like it. And so now comes the moment where I would like to talk about what I titled this exhibition, which is curating for the common good, because about 5 years ago now, I curated this exhibition about a Dutch designer called Christine Meinertsma. Maybe some of you know her. She should really come here for a talk like this one, because she's amazing. And she has this really unique way of working with design, which is not based on objects, but much more on materials and processes. She really investigates how the economy of wool works, or the economy of flax, which is the material that you make linen from. And And so when I was working with her for about 6 months, I realized that she is a designer and she makes sort of commercial products, but the commercial products are not the end point of her design. Her really interesting parts are all her investigations, but she doesn't necessarily have someone who gives her a lot of time and money for that. And that is the interesting part. And now I would like to remind you of that first exhibition that I showed you, which is the one from the British Council. A lot of design exhibitions used to be about promoting design that is made for business, that's sort of driving, that's made for sale. So that's different from art. The art is often made for the gallery, but in design we often show commercial work. But I think what we need to do more as curators is show the work, the ideas, and not the products, like this kind of investigation. So keep going. She went to a place where they collect recycled clothes and found out if what it said on the label really was true, and sort of worked with laboratories to and it wasn't. They were all not 100% wool. But that research is what I realized, we really want to bring that out. That's really exciting. And it made me think that as curators, we shouldn't be kind of putting on products that are for sale somewhere anyway, but what we should do is work with contemporary designers so that they can invent new ideas and we give them the space for that. So next one. So, and even Paola Antonelli, if you know one design curator, you probably know her. She's from the MoMA. She even sort of said that in an interview a little while ago, that you always think that design is something that makes a better world, but it's not always that. And so I think the cultural space can be the space where we as designers and as curators can work together to make those propositions outside of the commercial kind of arena. So next. This is sort of in the same way. It's also about how design curating has always often been like, this is good design, or do this, or it's about promoting Scandinavian design or Italian design. But I think it's today that's sort of not so relevant anymore. And so I kind of continued doing that when I was making those small shows with smaller designers, or with designers who made interesting work but didn't necessarily do commercial work. This is Daisy Ginsberg. She's an artist and designer from the UK. And so I really started trying to commission work, like to sort of raise money and then make sure that it's put into the development of her projects that are more comments or ideas on something, or proposing new ways of looking at something. So next one. And so this is a project that died. It came as, that was the only thing that ever happened for that project. It is announced, and it was about lots of designers who work with seaweed. They formed this network, and what we wanted to do was make an exhibition that's kind of like a shop front for that network, because they have all these experiments, but they happen sort of behind closed doors, and it was to give that network a face, but it never happened because of the pandemic. So the big question really is, how do you exhibit ideas and not objects? I think that's sort of the really interesting part, and that I like to think about as a curator, that also you can find ideas that are 120 years old, as we did with the Women in Design exhibition. Often there's some amazing ideas out there, but because no one made an object out of it, it's not collected in a museum. And so then you need to find those things and exhibit them. So next. So those are the kind of things that I felt that I use as my tools. It's a sort of observing, about connecting the dots and finding the right format and enabling and changing. Those are the sort of things that I think, as designers, we always think we need tools like 3D modeling or whatever, but I think curating is much more about those sort of tacit tools. But I also realized, one more, sort of in teaching, I started teaching design students about curating, right? This is a workshop I did at RMIT actually 2 years ago with the National Gallery of Victoria. And we sort of did a curating workshop where they were given the question, like, what do they care about? What's important to them? And all of them chose projects to do with sustainability and ecology and sort of social justice. And then they made an exhibition about it. And then I realized that those skills that you need as a curator, they were really interesting to them as designers as well, like to get very precise about research, like Christine Meinertsma with her materials, to really sort of do a huge body of research and not know what comes out of it and think about exhibiting. So when I asked those designers to be curators, I realized that the skills that I was trying to work with them on in terms of curating were actually skills that they would need for designing as well. And so, and also I'm doing a big project at the moment. I can't show any visuals yet with Forma Fantasma, who are designers that you probably know. And they are actually doing that. They are designers, and they have started developing from a project that actually was commissioned at the NGV. It was about electronic waste. One more. They sort of started to develop these huge bodies of research where it's much more about really getting stuck into a question and understanding how materials work and how the economy around them works, and not being so focused on the final product. And the reason why they can do that is because they work in the cultural space. So next one. This is my last slide. Just last week I was talking to a landscape architect called Julia Watson. She has a studio in New York, and she works just like a normal landscape architect, but she does these big journeys. She has done one book about sort of indigenous architecture or indigenous technologies. This is a bridge that is sort of like a traditional bridge building technique, I think in Indonesia. And she does these sort of big bodies of research, but also runs a normal landscape architecture practice. And I asked her how she applies all that research about indigenous technologies into her landscape architecture. And she said she can't, because landscape architecture has all of these processes and it's so difficult and no one will listen to her to try something new. And so she said that what she does, next slide, is that she uses the sort of cultural space. This is an exhibition at the Barbican in London. She uses the cultural space to try out these ideas. So I think as curators and as designers, we can really use the cultural space or cultural spaces that we invent or that we make or spaces that we find to sort of test out design ideas and present research and really think about not design as an object or a business, but as something that's actually sort of making a contribution or an impact. So I wanted to end on that because that was just last week. And it sort of, again, like told me, yeah, I think this is really right. Like I think as curators and designers, you know, we're starting to try and have the same skill set. Like I think designers need much more of that research and sort of like way of doing research outside of the commercial entity. And then the cultural space might be the place where they can work with curators to show that. Yes. And so that is my final.